The Vampire King sat at the head of the longest table in the Eastern Hemisphere, surrounded by 300 voices that never once spoke to him. Lucien Noctis had ruled the court of Endless Night for 7 centuries, but tonight, on the eve of his 1000th year of existence, he might as well have been a portrait hanging on the wall. His pale fingers rested against the stem of a crystal glass filled with blood so old it had turned black with power, the kind of vintage reserved for centennial celebrations, and he had not lifted it once in the past hour. Around him the court moved like a river around stone, flowing, churning, alive with gossip and intrigue and the endless dance of vampiric politics, and not one of them had met his eyes since the feast began. Elder Constantine held court 3 seats to Lucien's left, his white hair braided with silver thread, his voice booming as he recounted some battle from the Crusades. A cluster of younger vampires, none less than 200 years old, leaned in with hungry expressions, though whether they hungered for the story or Constantine's favor was unclear. To Lucien's right, Elder Valentina traced her finger along the rim of her glass and whispered something that made Lord Dragomir laugh, a sound like breaking ice. They did not glance Lucien's way. They had not asked his opinion. They had not even acknowledged the empty chair beside him, the place that should have held a queen. Had Lucien ever been foolish enough to believe he had the authority to choose one? The great hall stretched beneath a vaulted ceiling painted with scenes of the old wars, back when vampires had fought for their territories with fang and claw instead of parliamentary procedure. Chandeliers hung heavy with black candles, their flames casting everything in shades of amber and shadow. The table itself was a work of art, carved from a single massive oak that had been alive when Rome fell, polished to a mirror shine and laden with enough finery to ransom a kingdom. Silver platters held delicacies both human and supernatural. Rare cuts of meat so fresh they still bled, fruits that only grew in the vampire realm beneath the earth, and goblets upon goblets of blood in every vintage and variation. It was a feast worthy of a king. Lucien felt like a ghost at his own funeral. More wine, Elder Constantine? A young vampire with eager eyes and 2 new fangs hovered at the elder's elbow, holding a decanter as though it were a sacred relic. Yes, yes. Constantine waved his hand without looking. And fetch the 1804 reserve from the cellar. Tonight we celebrate properly, even if some have forgotten what celebration means. The barb was not aimed at Lucien. It was not aimed at anyone. Constantine simply spoke, and the court listened, and Lucien sat 3 seats away wearing a crown that felt heavier with each passing decade. The debt bond burned cold against his chest, invisible to every eye but his own, a mark seared into his very essence 3 centuries ago when he had been young and desperate and foolish enough to accept help from the Council of Elders. They had saved his kingdom from a war that would have torn the vampire realm apart. In exchange, he had given them a leash. The court obeyed them. His own court, his own people, and there was nothing he could do about it unless he wanted to watch everything his family had built crumble to dust. So he sat. He wore the crown. He presided over feasts where no one spoke to him, and he told himself it was the price of peace. Your Majesty. The voice was soft, uncertain, and so unexpected that Lucien's head turned before he could stop himself. A girl stood at his elbow, young by any measure, human by the warmth that radiated from her skin. She wore the simple black dress of the serving staff, her dark hair pulled back in a braid that had started to come loose over the course of the long evening. She held an empty tray against her hip, and her eyes, a startling shade of hazel that caught the candlelight, were fixed on his face with something that looked almost like concern. "Are you all right?" she asked. The question was so absurd, so completely outside the script of the evening, that for a moment Lucien could only stare. Around them the feast continued without pause. No one had noticed her approach. No one was watching. In a room full of vampires with senses sharp enough to hear a heartbeat from across the hall, this one human girl had somehow become invisible simply by being beneath their notice. Lucien's voice came out rougher than he intended. He had not spoken in over an hour. "I am well." "You haven't touched your glass." She glanced at the black blood, then back to his face. "And you look, if you don't mind my saying, Your Majesty, you look very alone." Something in Lucien's chest constricted, an ache he had not allowed himself to feel in decades. She was right. He was alone, had been alone, would continue to be alone as long as the debt bond held. But no one had ever said it out loud before. No one had ever looked at him and seen it. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. "Briar." She shifted the tray, nervous now, as though realizing she had overstepped. "Briar Delacour. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. I'll leave you to your feast, your majesty." "No." The word came out sharper than he meant, and he softened his tone. "Stay. That is, I would know why you asked." Briar's throat bobbed as she swallowed. This close, Lucien could hear her pulse, steady and strong, could smell the soap she had used and the faint scent of jasmine that clung to her skin. She was not afraid of him, he realized. Nervous, yes, but not afraid. "I've been working in the hall all night," she said slowly. "Clearing plates, filling glasses, the things servants do. And I've watched you sit here, and I've watched everyone around you talk and laugh and act like you're not even here. It seemed—" She paused, searching for words. "It seemed cruel, even for vampires, especially tonight, when this is supposed to be your celebration. You are observant." Lucien felt the corner of his mouth lift, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. "And kind to care. I just thought someone should ask." Briar's cheeks colored, a bloom of pink that fascinated him. Everyone deserves to have someone ask. Before Lucien could respond, Elder Constantine's voice cut across the table like a blade. "Girl, we require more of the Bordeaux vintage. Stop bothering His Majesty and attend to your duties." Briar flinched, and Lucien felt a flash of anger so sharp it surprised him. But she ducked her head, murmured, "Of course, Elder," and hurried away, her braids swinging against her back. Lucien watched her go, watched her disappear into the crowd of servants moving like shadows between the tables, and felt the weight of his crown settle even heavier. Constantine had not been looking at Lucien when he gave the order. None of them ever did. The feast dragged on. Lucien sat through 7 more courses, through speeches given by elders who spoke of his reign as though he were not present to hear it, through toasts raised in his honor that never once met his eyes. He had endured worse. He had endured centuries of this, the slow erosion of his authority until he was nothing more than a symbol, a name invoked but never consulted. He could endure one more night. But his eyes kept finding the servant girl, Briar, as she moved through the hall. She worked with quiet efficiency, her movements practiced but not servile. When she poured wine, she did it with steady hands. When she cleared plates, she stacked them carefully, never letting the porcelain clink too loudly. And once, just once, she glanced back toward the head table, and her eyes found his across the distance, and something passed between them that Lucien could not name. It was past midnight when the feast finally began to wind down. The vampires would continue celebrating until dawn forced them to retreat to their chambers, but the formalities were complete, the speeches delivered, the centennial marked. Lucien rose from his seat, and the hall fell silent, not out of respect but out of habit, the old forms observed even when they had lost all meaning. "My thanks to the council for this celebration," Lucien said, his voice carrying easily across the hall. "And to all who have gathered to mark this occasion, may the night continue to bring you joy." It was the expected speech, the rote words. Elder Valentina inclined her head in gracious acknowledgement, as though he had asked her permission to speak. Lucien felt the debt bond pulse against his chest, cold and constricting, a reminder of his place. He descended from the dais and walked toward the tall doors at the end of the hall, and the crowd parted for him automatically, still talking among themselves, still laughing, still ignoring him now that his ceremonial role was complete. He was nearly to the door when he heard the crash. Lucien turned to see Briar on her knees among a scatter of broken crystal, her hands already bleeding from where she had tried to catch the tray. A goblet rolled across the floor, spilling dark red blood in a stream toward Elder Constantine's polished boots. The hall went quiet, and Constantine looked down at the mess with an expression of cold disdain. "Clumsy human," he said softly. "You've ruined a vintage worth more than your life. I'm sorry, Elder." Briar kept her head down, her voice tight. "It won't happen again." "No, it won't." Constantine's hand moved faster than any human eye could follow, catching Briar's chin and jerking her head up. "Because you'll be dismissed from service. We cannot have incompetence in the king's hall, even from the lowest servants." Lucien moved without thinking. One moment he was by the door, the next he was standing beside Constantine, his hand wrapped around the elder's wrist in a grip that made the ancient vampire's eyes widen in surprise. "Release her," Lucien said quietly. The hall had gone deathly silent. 300 vampires watched with sudden, avid interest. Constantine stared at Lucien as though he had never seen him before, and perhaps he hadn't. Not like this. Not with Lucien's power radiating outward in a wave that made the candles flicker and the blood in every glass shiver. "Your Majesty," Constantine said carefully, "this is a matter of household discipline. Surely you need not concern yourself." "I said release her." Lucien's voice dropped even lower, edged with a command he had not used in 300 years. "Now." Constantine let go. Briar stumbled back, one hand pressed to her jaw where his fingers had left red marks. Lucien did not look at her. He kept his eyes on Constantine, on the elder who had spoken for him and over him for 3 centuries, and he let the full weight of his age and his power settle in the space between them. "The girl stays," Lucien said, "and you will not touch her again. Do you understand, elder?" The debt bond burned ice cold against his chest, pulling, constricting, reminding him of the price of defiance. But Lucien held Constantine's gaze and did not flinch, and after a long moment the elder bowed his head. "As you wish, your Majesty." It was a victory so small it barely counted, but it was the first one Lucien had claimed in 300 years. He felt it settle in his bones, fragile and precious and terrifying. Then he turned to Briar, who was staring at him with wide eyes, her bleeding hands still cradled against her chest. "Come," he said, and held out his hand. She took it without hesitation, her warm fingers curling around his cold ones, and Lucien led her out of the great hall while 300 vampires watched in silence. The corridor outside was empty and blessedly quiet, the thick stone walls muffling the sounds of the feast. Lucien guided Briar to a small alcove, where a bench sat beneath a stained glass window, and he released her hand only to examine the cuts on her palms. They were not deep, but glass had embedded itself in her skin, tiny shards that glittered in the candlelight. "This will hurt," he said, and began carefully extracting the pieces. Briar sucked in a breath but did not pull away. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "I would have been fine." "No, you would not have." Lucien kept his focus on her hands, on the delicate work of cleaning her wounds. "Constantine would have seen you dismissed and blacklisted from every position in the city. You would not have found work anywhere that matters." "Then why did you stop him?" It was a fair question. Lucien did not have a good answer, or rather, he had several answers, and none of them made sense. Because she had asked if he was all right. Because she had seen him when no one else did. Because the thought of Constantine's hands on her had filled him with a rage he had not felt since the wars. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally, "and it was not a lie, even if it was not the whole truth." He pulled the last shard from her palm and pressed his thumb against the cut to stop the bleeding. Briar watched his face, her hazel eyes searching, and Lucien found himself unable to look away. She was lovely, he realized, not in the way of vampires, all sharp edges and predatory grace, but in a softer way, like candlelight through autumn leaves, human and warm and entirely unsuited to the cold politics of his court. "Thank you," she whispered. "You thanked me by asking if I was all right," Lucien said. "I am simply returning the courtesy." "Are you, though, all right?" He should have lied. It would have been easy, a smooth deflection, a king's prerogative to keep his troubles private, but something in her earnest gaze made the lie stick in his throat, and instead he found himself saying, "No, I have not been all right for a very long time." Briar's expression softened. "Because of them? The elders? It is complicated." Lucien released her hand and stood, pacing to the window. Beyond the colored glass, the city spread out in a glitter of electric lights, the modern world that had grown up around his ancient court like ivy covering stone. They hold power over this court, power I gave them long ago when I needed their help. I thought it would be temporary. I thought I could reclaim it when the crisis passed. But 3 centuries later, here we are. 300 years? Briar's voice was faint. You've been like that for 300 years? Longer, if I am honest. The feast tonight was simply a clearer illustration than most. Lucien turned back to face her. Why does it matter to you? You barely know me. I am a vampire, Briar. Your people's legends are full of reasons to fear me, and not all of them are wrong. I don't fear you. She stood, cradling her bandaged hands against her chest. I don't know why. I should, probably. But when I look at you, I don't see a monster. I see someone who's lonely and trying very hard to pretend he's not. The words hit harder than any blow Lucien had taken in battle. He stared at her, this human girl with her 2 honest eyes and her bleeding hands, and felt something crack open inside him, some sealed chamber of his heart he had locked away when he accepted the debt bond. You should go, he said roughly. It is late, and you have already taken enough risks on my behalf tonight. Will you be all right? Briar asked, and there it was again, that simple question that no one else thought to ask. I will endure, Lucien said. I always do. She looked like she wanted to argue, but after a moment she nodded and walked toward the corridor that led to the servants' quarters. At the archway she paused and glanced back. For what it's worth, Your Majesty, she said softly. I think you're a good king. A real king. Whatever they've tried to make you. Then she was gone, and Lucien was alone in the alcove with the ghost of her warmth still lingering in the air. He pressed his hand against his chest, against the debt bond that pulsed cold beneath his ribs, and for the first time in 300 years, he wondered if there might be a way to break it. But breaking the debt bond was not a matter of power or will. Lucien had both in abundance, enough to level the Elder's strongholds if he truly wished, enough to tear the court apart and rebuild it in his image. The bond was not a chain of force. It was a chain of debt, of honor, of the old codes that governed vampire society more absolutely than any law. He had accepted their help, sworn to honor the debt, and bound himself to their will until the debt was repaid. The problem was that the debt could never be repaid. That had been the trap, the subtle cruelty of it. The elders had structured the terms so that Lucien owed them perpetual gratitude, perpetual deference, perpetual obedience. They had saved his kingdom, yes, but in doing so, they had made it theirs. The only clause, the only possible escape, was buried so deep in the ancient contract that Lucien had nearly forgotten it existed. The debt bond could be broken by the bonded party if, and only if, they invoked the right of defiance. But the right came with a cost. Lucien would have to name something he valued more than the peace the elders had brought, something worth fighting for, even if it meant war. And he would have to prove it, publicly, before the assembled court. For 300 years, Lucien had not been able to name such a thing. His kingdom, already compromised. His pride, eroded to nothing. His freedom, an abstract concept, hardly worth the bloodshed that would follow. But tonight, standing in an empty alcove with the memory of Briar's warm hand in his, Lucien thought he might have finally found it. The days after the feast passed slowly, measured in the careful dance of court politics and the quiet rebellion growing in Lucien's chest. He began paying attention again, truly paying attention, to the way the elders operated. Valentina controlled the blood supply, managing the vast network of human donors and blood banks that kept the vampire population fed without resorting to the old ways of hunting. Constantine held the military, such as it was, the enforcers and guards who kept order in the realm beneath the city. And Elder Cassius, who had been absent from the feast due to business abroad, controlled the treasury and the intricate web of investments that made the vampire court one of the wealthiest powers in the modern world. Between the 3 of them, they had divided Lucien's kingdom into neat parcels, and they ruled it with efficiency and cold precision. The court ran smoothly. The vampires were well fed and content. There were no wars, no uprisings, no threats to their continued existence. It was everything Lucien had wanted when he accepted their help, and it chafed like iron shackles. He started attending council meetings again, not just sitting at the head of the table while the elders talked around him, but actually listening, asking questions, pointing out inconsistencies. The elders tolerated it with thin patience, humoring him the way one might humor a child playing at being an adult. But Lucien persisted, and slowly he began to understand just how deep their control ran. And through it all, he found his thoughts returning to Briar. She worked in the palace, he discovered, assigned to the household staff that maintained the residential wings. He saw her sometimes in passing, carrying linens or polishing silver, always moving with that same quiet efficiency. She never approached him again, never spoke out of turn, but whenever their eyes met across a corridor or a room, she would smile, small and private, and Lucien would feel that crack in his chest widen a little more. It was dangerous, this fascination. The elders would notice eventually, and they would move to eliminate anything that threatened their carefully maintained status quo. But Lucien could not seem to stop himself from seeking her out, from arranging his schedule so that he might pass through the East Wing when he knew she would be working there, from lingering in hallways just for the chance of a glimpse. 2 weeks after the feast, he found her in the library. It was late afternoon, that golden hour before sunset, when the palace grew quiet, as the vampires retreated to their chambers to sleep. Lucien had always loved this time, the peace of it, the rare solitude. He had come to the library to search for something in the old texts, some loophole or precedent that might help him understand the debt bond better, and he found Briar instead, curled in a chair by the tall windows with a book spread across her lap. She looked up when he entered, her eyes widening. "Your Majesty, I'm sorry, I didn't think anyone would. I can leave." "No." Lucien crossed to her, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. "This is not a private library. You have every right to be here." Still, Briar closed the book, and he caught a glimpse of the title, A History of the Vampire Realm, 3rd edition. "I probably shouldn't be reading this. It's not exactly servant material." "Why are you reading it?" Lucien asked, genuinely curious. She hesitated, then said, "I wanted to understand. After the feast, after what you did for me, I realized I don't actually know anything about this world. About vampires, about the court, about you. And if I'm going to work here, I should understand. That is remarkably pragmatic of you." Lucien picked up the book, flipping through pages dense with dates and battles and political machinations. Though I must warn you, this particular text has a bias toward the council's perspective. It paints them as saviors more often than is strictly accurate. "What's the accurate version?" Briar asked. Lucien looked at her, at this human girl who had somehow slipped past all his defenses without even trying, and made a decision. "I will tell you, if you wish. But it is a long story, and not a particularly happy one. I have time." Briar shifted in the chair, making room, and after a moment's hesitation, Lucien sat beside her. The light through the windows turned amber and gold, the last rays of sun that he could tolerate without discomfort, and he began to speak. He told her about the war, 700 years ago, when rival vampire houses had turned on each other in a conflict that threatened to expose their existence to the human world. He told her about his father, the previous king, who had died trying to hold the kingdom together, and about Lucien's desperate ascension to a throne that was crumbling beneath him. He told her about the elders who had come with offers of help, their resources and influence and ancient power, and about the debt bond he had accepted in exchange. "I thought I was saving my people," Lucien said quietly, "and perhaps I did. But I gave up everything I was in the process." Briar had listened without interruption, her hazel eyes never leaving his face. Now she reached out and covered his hand with hers, a touch so warm it almost burned. "You were young," she said, "and you were trying to do the right thing. That's not weakness, Lucien. That's strength." It was the first time she had used his name without the title, and the sound of it in her voice did something strange to his heart. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers, marveling at how small and human and alive she felt. "You barely know me," he said, echoing his words from the night of the feast. "Why do you care?" "Because I see you," Briar said simply. "Not the king, not the figurehead. You." and I think you're worth caring about." Lucien felt something in him shift, some fundamental realignment of his world. He had lived for 1,000 years, had seen empires rise and fall, had walked through centuries of change and upheaval, and in all that time he had never met anyone like Briar Delacour. She was brave without being reckless, kind without being weak, and she looked at him like he mattered, not for what he could do for her or what power he represented, but simply because he was himself. "Briar," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he could not name, "if you continue to show me kindness, I fear I will become dependent on it, and that would be dangerous for both of us." "Why?" She squeezed his hand. "What would they do if they knew?" "The elders do not tolerate disruptions," Lucien said carefully. "And you, my dear, are very much a disruption. If they thought you were influencing me, encouraging me to question their authority, they would remove you from the equation, permanently if necessary." Briar's face paled, but she did not pull away. "Then we'll be careful. We'll be discreet." "You are not afraid." "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But I'm not going to stop talking to you because of it. You've been alone for 300 years, Lucien. You deserve to have someone who sees you, even if it's just me." He should have sent her away. It would have been the wise choice, the safe choice, the choice that would protect her from the machinations of the court. But Lucien had been wise and safe for 3 centuries, and it had brought him nothing but isolation and despair. So instead he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture from an older time, courtly and chaste and full of unspoken promise. "Then I am grateful, Briar Delacour," he said, "more grateful than you know." They fell into a rhythm after that, stolen moments in quiet corners of the palace. Briar would bring him tea in the library, claiming she was just doing her rounds. Lucien would find excuses to walk through the east wing where he might catch her polishing silver or changing linens. They talked about everything and nothing: her childhood in the city, his centuries of existence, the books she loved, the places he had traveled, the small details of their lives that wove together into something larger and more significant than either of them wanted to acknowledge. And slowly, carefully, Lucien began to change. It started small. When Constantine proposed a new regulation on blood distribution that would have enriched the elders' allies at the expense of the younger vampires, Lucien questioned it, pointing out the inequity. When Valentina dismissed a guard for what she claimed was incompetence, Lucien investigated and discovered the guard had simply refused to ignore one of Valentina's more questionable orders. He reinstated the guard personally, and though the debt bond burned cold in warning, he did not back down. The court noticed. How could they not? For 300 years their king had been a silent presence, and now he was speaking, questioning, asserting himself in ways both small and significant. Some of the younger vampires began to look at him with something like hope. The elders looked at him with suspicion and growing anger. "You are playing a dangerous game, Your Majesty," Valentina said to him one evening, cornering him in the corridor outside the council chamber. Her white hair gleamed like ice in the candlelight, and her red eyes were cold. "The council has noticed your recent activism. We are concerned." "Concerned about what, Elder?" Lucien kept his voice level, his posture relaxed. "That I am finally doing the job I was crowned for?" "Concerned that you are forgetting the debt you owe." Valentina stepped closer, and Lucien smelled old blood and older magic on her. "We saved this kingdom, Lucien. We saved you. A little gratitude would not be amiss." "I have been grateful for 3 centuries, Lucien said softly. "Perhaps it is time for something else." Valentina's eyes narrowed. "Be very careful, boy. You may be king, but the debt bond ensures that this court belongs to us. Push too hard, and you will find yourself reminded of that fact in ways you will not enjoy." She swept past him, her gown rustling like dead leaves, and Lucien was left standing alone in the corridor, with the debt bond pulsing ice against his chest. It was a warning, clear and unmistakable. The elders would tolerate his rebellion only so far, and he was approaching the limit. He needed to move faster. That night, he found Briar in the kitchens, helping the cook prepare the next day's meals. She looked up when he entered, surprise and pleasure chasing across her face, and his heart did that strange, twisting thing it had started doing whenever he saw her. Lucien. She wiped her hands on her apron. What are you doing down here? If someone sees, I needed to speak with you. He caught her hand and pulled her into the pantry, away from the curious eyes of the kitchen staff. In the close darkness, surrounded by sacks of flour and hanging herbs, he could hear her heartbeat, fast and strong. The elders are moving against me. Against us. I need to know if you are certain, Briar. If you are truly willing to risk this. Risk what? She searched his face in the dim light. Lucien, what are you planning? To break the debt bond, he said, and the words hung between them like a thrown gauntlet. To invoke the right of defiance and reclaim my court. But it will mean war, Briar. Not with swords, perhaps, but with politics and power, and the elders will fight with everything they have, and they will come for you, because you are what gave me the strength to try. Briar was quiet for a long moment, her eyes wide and dark. Then she said, What happens if you break it? The bond? I become king in truth again, Lucien said. The court's loyalty returns to me instead of being divided among the elders. I can rule as I was meant to, without their interference. But I have to name something I value more than the peace they brought, something worth fighting for. And then I have to defend that claim before the court. What will you name? Briar asked, though he thought she already knew. You, Lucien said simply. I will name you, Briar, because in 1,000 years of existence, I have never met anyone who made me want to fight for something again. You see me, not as a symbol or a figurehead, but as a man, and that is more valuable to me than any peace the elders could provide. Her breath caught. Lucien, I'm just a servant girl, I'm nobody. You are everything, he said fiercely, framing her face with his hands. You are brave and kind and honest, and you asked if I was all right when no one else cared to notice I was suffering. Do not diminish yourself, Briar Delacour, not to me. Tears shone in her eyes, catching the faint light from the kitchen beyond. What if I'm not strong enough? What if I can't be what you need me to be? You already are. Lucien pressed his forehead to hers, breathing in her warmth, her humanity, her life. But I need to know you are willing, because once I invoke the right of defiance, there is no going back. The elders will make you a target, and I will protect you with everything I have, but I cannot guarantee your safety. This is a risk I am asking you to take, and I will not demand it of you. Briar lifted her hands to cover his, her fingers warm against his cold skin. I'm already in love with you, she whispered. I have been since the night of the feast, maybe. So yes, Lucien, I'm willing, whatever it takes. The confession hit him like dawn breaking over mountains, brilliant and overwhelming and utterly transformative. Lucien had loved before, in his long life, brief passions that burned bright and faded fast. But this was different. This was Briar, seeing him at his lowest and choosing him anyway, offering her fragile human life in service of his freedom. It was the most precious gift he had ever received. I love you, he said, and the words felt like breaking a curse. I love you, Briar, and I will not let them hurt you. I swear it on my crown and my name and everything I am. She pulled him down and kissed him, and Lucien fell into the warmth of her like a man who had been cold for centuries finally finding fire. She tasted like hope and possibility and all the things he had thought lost to him, and when they broke apart, both breathing hard, he knew there was no path forward but the one they had chosen. When will you do it? Briar asked, her voice shaking only a little. Soon, Lucien said. I need to prepare, to gather what allies I have, to make sure everything is in place. But soon, my love, I promise. They stayed in the pantry a little longer, holding each other in the darkness, and Lucien memorized the feel of her in his arms, the sound of her heartbeat, the scent of jasmine and humanity. He would need the memory in the days to come. The preparation took 3 weeks, 3 weeks of careful maneuvering and quiet conversations with the few vampires in court who might still remember what it meant to serve a king instead of a council. Lucien found more support than he expected among the younger generation, vampires who had grown up under the elders' rule and chafed at the restrictions, who remembered the old stories of what the Court of Endless Night had been before the debt bond. Lord Draven, a vampire of only 4 centuries who controlled a significant portion of the city's nightlife, pledged his support quietly over a game of chess in Lucien's private study. "I have waited a long time to see you stand up to them, Your Majesty," he said, moving his rook with a decisive click. "Tell me what you need." Lady Seraphine, ancient and cunning and tired of Valentina's control over the blood supply, offered her resources and her influence among the donor networks. "It is time for a change," she said simply, and Lucien accepted her allegiance with gratitude. Others came forward, not many, but enough. Enough to make the elders nervous, enough to shift the balance of power just slightly in Lucien's favor. He moved carefully, never revealing his full plan, never giving the elders cause to strike before he was ready. And through it all, Briar was his constant, his anchor, the reason he kept pushing forward even when the debt bond burned cold enough to make his chest ache. The elders, of course, noticed. "The human girl," Constantine said, 3 days before Lucien planned to invoke the right of defiance. They were in the council chamber, the 3 elders arrayed on one side of the table and Lucien standing alone on the other, a tableau that had been repeated countless times over 3 centuries. But this time felt different, charged with tension and unspoken threats. "She has become a distraction, Your Majesty." "Briar is a member of my household staff," Lucien said evenly. "I fail to see how her competent performance of her duties constitutes a distraction." "You have been seen with her," Valentina said, her tone dripping with disapproval. "Frequently, in inappropriate locations, at inappropriate times. The court talks, Lucien. They wonder why their king spends so much time with a human servant. Let them wonder." Lucien met her gaze without flinching. "My private life is my own concern. Not when it affects your judgment." Cassius spoke for the first time, his voice dry and precise. He had returned from his business abroad 2 weeks ago and had been watching Lucien with the calculating gaze of a merchant assessing an investment. "You have been difficult lately, questioning our decisions, overturning our policies, stirring up discontent among the younger vampires. We believe the girl is influencing you." "Briar has no power in this court," Lucien said. "She is human, mortal, with no resources or influence beyond what I choose to give her. How could she possibly pose a threat to the council?" "Because you care for her," Constantine said bluntly, "and that makes you weak." The insult hung in the air between them, and Lucien felt his power rise in response, the ancient magic that came with his bloodline crackling through the room like a storm gathering. The elders felt it too. He saw them tense, saw Valentina's hand move toward the amulet she wore that channeled her own magic. "Careful, elder," Lucien said softly, dangerously. "You forget yourself." "Do I?" Constantine leaned forward, his white eyes gleaming. "You are the one who forgets, boy. You forget what you owe us, what you swore to honor. The debt bond is not a suggestion. It is a binding, absolute and inviolable. You cannot simply decide you are tired of it and walk away." "I am aware of the terms of the bond," Lucien said, "probably more aware than you give me credit for." "Then you know that this rebellion of yours is futile," Cassius said. "You can posture all you like, gather your little alliance of malcontents, spend your nights whispering with a human girl, but in the end you are bound to us. The court is ours. You are ours. Accept it, Lucien, and this can all go back to the way it was." "No," Lucien said, and the word fell like a hammer. "No, it cannot, because I am done accepting. I am done sitting silent while you rule my kingdom. I am done being a ghost in my own court. And I am done pretending that the debt bond is anything other than the leash you designed it to be." The elders exchanged glances, and Lucien saw something shift in their expressions, from anger to cold calculation. They had expected him to back down, he realized, expected him to fold under pressure the way he had for 300 years. The fact that he was standing his ground had caught them off balance. "You will regret this," Valentina said quietly. We have been patient with you, Lucien. We have tolerated your recent behavior out of respect for your position. But our patience is not infinite. Neither is mine, Lucien said. And you will find that I am not the broken boy you bound 3 centuries ago. I have learned much in my years of watching you rule. I know your weaknesses as well as you know mine. Push me, elders, and you may find the game has changed more than you realize. He left the council chamber before they could respond, walking with measured steps even though every instinct screamed at him to run, to find Briar and get her somewhere safe before the elders made their move. Because they would make a move, that much was certain. He had pushed too far, revealed too much, and they would not wait for him to invoke the right of defiance. They would strike first, and they would strike at his weakest point. Briar. Lucien found her in her small room in the servants' quarters, packing a bag with shaking hands. She looked up when he burst through the door, relief and fear chasing across her face. Lucien, thank God. Lady Seraphine sent word that I need to leave, that the elders are coming for you, yes. Lucien crossed to her and took the bag from her hands. But you are not running. Not anymore. We are doing this now, tonight, before they have time to act. Now? Briar's voice rose in pitch. But you said you needed more time, more preparation. The time for preparation is over. Lucien cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. I will invoke the right of defiance tonight, before the full court. I will name you as what I value above the elders' peace, and I will break the debt bond. But I need you to trust me, Briar. Can you do that? She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded. I trust you. What do you need me to do? Stand with me, Lucien said simply. When I call you before the court, walk through those doors and stand at my side. That is all. I will handle the rest. And if they try to stop me, they will not. Lucien's voice hardened with certainty. Because if they lay one hand on you before I have finished the invocation, they will break the very codes they claim to uphold. The right of defiance is sacred, written into the oldest laws of our kind. Even the elders cannot violate it without losing all credibility. You will be safe, my love. I swear it. Briar took a shaky breath, then nodded again. Okay. When do we start? Now. Lucien pulled her into a fierce kiss, pouring everything he felt into it, his love, his determination, his promise to protect her, then released her and stepped back. Go to the servants' entrance to the great hall and wait there. When you hear me call your name, come to me. No matter what anyone says or does, walk straight to the dais and take my hand. Understood? Understood. Briar squeezed his hand once, then let go. Lucien, I love you. I love you, Briar Delacour, he said. And after tonight, the whole court will know it. The great hall filled quickly once the word went out that the king had called an emergency assembly. Vampires poured in from all corners of the palace, curious and excited and wary, taking their places at the long tables or standing along the walls. The elders arrived last, Constantine and Valentina and Cassius moving as a united front, their faces set in identical expressions of cold fury. Lucien stood on the dais at the head of the hall, wearing the full regalia of his office for the first time in decades. The crown sat heavy on his white hair, wrought from black iron and set with blood-red rubies that had been mined in the vampire realm when it was first established. His coat was velvet the color of midnight, embroidered with silver thread in patterns of thorns and stars, and at his throat he wore the royal seal, an amulet that marked him as the rightful king of the court of endless night. He looked, for the first time in 300 years, like a king. The hall fell silent as he raised his hand, 300 vampires turning their attention to the dais with an intensity that would have been gratifying if Lucien had any room left in his heart for pride. He had only one goal now, one purpose, and everything else fell away before it. Members of the Court of Endless Night, he began, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. I have called you here tonight to invoke an ancient right, one that has not been used in this court for over 500 years. I speak of the right of defiance as granted by the Codex Noctis and honored by all vampire houses since the first nights of our kind. A ripple of shock ran through the assembly. The right of defiance was legendary, the kind of thing that appeared in histories and legal texts but never in actual practice. To invoke it was to challenge the very foundation of the court's power structure. Constantine stood, his face flushed with anger. "Your Majesty, this is highly irregular. The council was not consulted." "The council does not need to be consulted," Lucien cut him off, his tone sharp. "The right of defiance is the sole prerogative of the bonded party. And I am the one who is bonded, am I not, Elder Constantine? Bonded by the debt I swore to you and your fellow counselors 3 centuries ago." "You swore an oath," Valentina hissed, rising to stand beside Constantine. "You gave your word, Lucien. You cannot simply break it because you have grown tired of the consequences." "I am not breaking my word," Lucien said, his voice ringing with certainty. "I am invoking a right granted to me by the same laws that created the debt bond in the first place, unless you wish to argue that the Codex Noctis no longer applies to this court." The elders fell silent, trapped by their own adherence to the old laws. The Codex Noctis was the foundation of vampire society, the collection of rules and precedents that governed everything from succession to territory to blood rights. To deny, it was to deny the legitimacy of their own power. Cassius stepped forward, his expression calculating. "Very well, Your Majesty. State your claim. What is it you value above the peace we have brought to this realm?" This was the moment, the point of no return. Lucien felt the debt bond pulse against his chest, cold and constricting, trying to pull him back, to make him submit. But he thought of Briar's warm hands in his, her quiet question on the night of the feast, the way she saw him when no one else did, and the bond's pull meant nothing. "I value love," Lucien said, his voice clear and unwavering. "I value the courage to be seen, the strength to stand against injustice, the hope that even after centuries of darkness there can still be light. I value a future where I am not a puppet dancing on strings you control, where the court serves the crown instead of 3 elders who have grown drunk on power they were never meant to hold." He paused, letting the words sink in, watching the faces of the assembled vampires shift from shock to interest to, in some cases, hope. "But most of all," Lucien continued, "I value her. The one who saw me when I had been invisible for 300 years, the one who asked if I was all right when no one else cared to notice, the one who gave me a reason to fight again." He turned toward the servants' entrance, raising his voice to carry through the hall. "Briar Delacourt, come to me." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the door opened, and Briar stepped into the great hall. She had changed from her servant's dress into something simple but elegant, a gown of deep blue that Lord Draven must have provided, and her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders. She looked terrified and brave and absolutely beautiful, and every eye in the hall turned to watch as she walked toward the dais, her chin held high and her hazel eyes fixed on Lucien's face. Valentina moved to intercept her, but Cassius caught the elder's arm, shaking his head. He was right. To interfere now would be to violate the sanctity of the invocation, and even the elders could not afford that. So they stood frozen while Briar crossed the hall, climbed the steps to the dais, and placed her hand in Lucien's outstretched one. The debt bond burned ice cold, fighting him, trying to force him to his knees. But Lucien held Briar's hand and felt her warmth flow through him, melting the ice, breaking the chains link by link. He turned to face the court with Briar at his side, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the full weight of his power and his 1,000 years of existence. "I name Briar Delacourt as the one I value above all else," he declared. "Above peace, above politics, above the debt I owe to the Council of Elders. She is my choice, freely made, and I claim the right of defiance to break the bond that has held me for 3 centuries. Let any who would challenge this claim step forward now and face me, not as a figurehead, but as a king." The hall erupted in chaos. Vampires shouted, some in support, others in outrage. The elders stood together at the base of the dais, their faces twisted with fury, and Lucien saw Constantine's hand move toward the amulet at his throat, saw the gathering of power that meant he was preparing to strike. "Do it," Lucien said softly, for Constantine's ears only. Break the sanctity of the right of defiance. Attack me while I am in the middle of the invocation. Let the entire court see you violate the Codex Noctis. See how long your power lasts after that." Constantine froze, his hand trembling with suppressed rage. Beside him, Valentina looked like she wanted to tear Lucien apart with her bare hands, and Cassius was watching the crowd, watching the way the younger vampires had started to press forward, their expressions eager and hungry, and Lucien saw the exact moment the elder realized they had lost. "You cannot do this," Valentina said, but her voice lacked the certainty it had held before. "The debt bond is absolute." "The debt bond is breakable," Lucien corrected. "And I am breaking it. Now, witness." He pressed his hand to his chest, to the place where the bond burned cold, and reached for it with his power. It fought him, writhing like a living thing, trying to sink its claws deeper into his essence. But Lucien was 1,000 years old and the rightful king of the court of endless night, and he had spent 3 centuries learning every aspect of the bond that held him. He knew its structure, its weaknesses, the exact pressure points where it could be forced to break. And he had Briar, her hand warm in his, her presence a blazing light that burned away the ice. The bond shattered. It did not break quietly. The sound was like thunder, like breaking glass, like the earth splitting open, and it reverberated through the great hall loud enough to make some of the vampires clap their hands over their ears. Lucien gasped as the cold presence that had lived in his chest for 300 years suddenly vanished, leaving behind a warmth and a lightness he had almost forgotten was possible. The court felt it too. He saw it in their faces, the moment when their loyalty shifted, when the invisible strings that had bound them to the elder's will snapped and returned to him. It was like watching a building reassemble itself, all the scattered pieces flying back together to form the whole. He was king again, truly, completely, undeniably king. Constantine staggered, his face going white as he felt the loss of his power over the court. Valentina made a sound like a wounded animal, and Cassius simply closed his eyes, his expression one of resignation. "It is done," Lucien said, his voice ringing through the suddenly silent hall. "The debt is broken, the bond is severed, and the court of endless night returns to its rightful rule. Elders Constantine, Valentina, and Cassius, you are hereby stripped of your seats on the council. You will retain your personal holdings and your status as members of the court, but your authority over this kingdom ends tonight." "You will regret this," Constantine snarled, but there was no power behind the words, only impotent rage. "You think you can rule without us? You think you are strong enough? You will fall, boy, and when you do, we will be there to pick up the pieces." "Perhaps," Lucien said calmly, "but I would rather fall trying to rule justly than succeed by allowing you to rule in my name. Now leave. You are dismissed." The elders stood frozen for a moment longer, then turned as one and stalked toward the doors. The crowd parted for them, not out of respect, but out of the simple desire not to be in their path when they were this angry. The doors slammed shut behind them with a finality that echoed through the hall. Then, slowly, the vampires began to kneel. It started with Lord Draven, who dropped to one knee at the base of the dais and bowed his white head. Then Lady Seraphine followed, and then others, one by one and then in waves, until the entire court was kneeling before Lucien with their heads bowed in submission and respect. It was the acknowledgement he had not received in 300 years, the recognition of his authority and his right to rule, and Lucien felt something in his chest expand to fill the space where the debt bond had been. Not pride, exactly, though there was some of that. More like purpose, the sense that he could finally do what he had been meant to do all along. He looked down at Briar, still standing at his side, and saw tears streaming down her face. "It worked," she whispered. "Lucien, it actually worked." "Thanks to you," he said, pulling her close. "I could not have done this without you, my brave, impossible human." "What happens now?" Briar asked, wiping at her eyes. Lucien looked out over his court, at the sea of kneeling vampires, at the future spreading out before him like an open road. "Now," he said, "we rebuild. We create the kingdom I always wanted this to be just, fair, ruled by law instead of fear. And we do it together." "Together," Briar agreed, and leaned into his side. The court rose at Lucien's gesture, and the hall erupted in conversation, excited and hopeful and chaotic in the way of major changes. Lord Draven climbed the dais to clasp Lucien's hand and offer his congratulations, and Lady Seraphine embraced Briar with surprising warmth, welcoming her to the inner circle. Others followed, and Lucien accepted their pledges of loyalty with graciousness and the quiet determination to prove himself worthy of their trust. But through it all, he never let go of Briar's hand. The following days were a whirlwind of change and reorganization. Lucien dissolved the Council of Elders and replaced it with a parliament of sorts, representatives from the different vampire houses and factions who would advise him but not control him. He reformed the blood distribution system to be more equitable, established new laws protecting the younger vampires from abuse by their elders, and opened diplomatic channels with other vampire courts that had been closed during the council's rule. It was exhausting, exhilarating work, and he threw himself into it with an energy he had not felt in centuries. For the first time since his father's death, Lucien felt like he was actually making a difference, shaping his kingdom into something better instead of just presiding over its slow decay. And through it all, Briar was there. She moved out of the servants' quarters and into a suite in the residential wing, not as a servant, but as Lucien's acknowledged companion. The court accepted her with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Some welcomed her warmly. Others remained suspicious of the human who had captured their king's heart, but no one dared challenge her place at Lucien's side. Not after what they had seen in the Great Hall. Lucien courted her properly, the way he should have from the beginning if circumstances had been different. He took her to the opera, to the hidden gardens beneath the city where night-blooming flowers filled the air with perfume, to the ancient libraries where texts older than most civilizations gathered dust. He showed her the vampire realm in all its dark beauty, and she met it with wonder and curiosity and a fearlessness that never ceased to amaze him. "I want to know everything," she told him one night as they walked through the moonlit gardens, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. "Every story, every secret, every part of this world. I want to understand it the way you do." "That could take centuries," Lucien said, amused. "Then I suppose we should start now." Briar smiled up at him, and Lucien's heart did that twisting thing again, the one that meant he was utterly, irrevocably lost to this woman. 3 months after the breaking of the debt bond, Lucien called Briar to his private study. She came in still wearing the clothes she had worn to the garden, her hair slightly mussed from the wind, and she looked so alive, so vibrantly human in the midst of his dark, immortal world that Lucien had to take a moment just to appreciate her. "You wanted to see me?" Briar settled into the chair across from his desk, tucking her feet under her with comfortable familiarity. "I did." Lucien came around the desk and knelt before her, taking both her hands in his. "Briar, these past months with you have been the happiest of my very long life. You have given me back my kingdom, my purpose, myself. You have stood beside me through every challenge and never wavered, even when it would have been easier to walk away. And I find myself unable to imagine a future without you in it." Briar's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Lucien, I know what I am asking is complicated," he continued. "You are human, mortal, with perhaps 60 or 70 years left to you if fortune is kind. I am vampire, immortal, and I will live long after you are gone unless something kills me first. But I have lived 1,000 years, Briar, and I have never felt for anyone what I feel for you. So I am asking, knowing all the complications, knowing everything we will face, will you marry me?" He produced a ring from his pocket, a simple band of white gold set with a single perfect diamond, and held it out to her with hands that were not quite steady. Briar stared at the ring, then at him, and tears welled in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course, yes. I love you, Lucien. I don't care about the complications or the future or any of it. I just want to be with you for as long as I can." Lucien slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Then he pulled her down from the chair and kissed her, long and deep and full of promise, and Briar melted into him the way she always did, warm and alive and his. There is one more thing, Lucien said when they finally broke apart. A choice you need to make, and I will not pressure you either way. You know that vampires can turn humans, yes? It is a dangerous process, not always successful, and it requires drinking vampire blood and then dying while that blood is still in your system. But if it works, you would become vampire. Immortal. You could stay with me not just for 60 years, but for centuries. Briar pulled back to look at him, her expression thoughtful. You want to turn me? I want you to have the option, Lucien corrected. If you choose to remain human, to live your natural life, and let me treasure every moment we have together, I will accept that and be grateful for whatever time we are given. But if you choose to become vampire, to walk this path with me for as long as we both endure, then I will turn you myself and spend the rest of eternity making sure you never regret it. That's a big decision, Briar said slowly, to give up being human, to become something else entirely. It is, Lucien agreed, which is why I am not asking you to decide now. Take your time, my love. Think about it, ask questions, learn everything you need to know to make an informed choice, and whatever you decide, I will support you. Briar nodded, then leaned her head against his shoulder. Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you want me to become vampire? Lucien considered the question carefully, weighing honesty against reassurance. Selfishly, yes, he said finally. I want as much time with you as I can possibly have. The thought of losing you in 60 years, of having to continue without you for the centuries after, is almost unbearable. But I also know that becoming vampire means giving up the sun, giving up aging, giving up the warm, vibrant humanity that is such a fundamental part of who you are. So I want it, but I will not let my wants pressure you into a choice you are not ready to make. Thank you, Briar said quietly, for being honest and for giving me time. You have all the time you need, Lucien promised, and held her close while the candles burned down and the night deepened around them. The wedding was held 2 months later, a ceremony that blended human and vampire traditions in ways that had the court's protocol officers tearing their hair out. Briar wore a gown of white silk that shimmered like moonlight, her dark hair crowned with night-blooming jasmine, and she walked down the aisle of the great hall on Lord Draven's arm since her own father had passed years ago. Lucien waited for her at the altar in formal black, the crown on his head and his heart in his throat, and when she reached him and took his hands, he felt more nervous than he had facing down the elders. You look terrified, Briar whispered, her eyes sparkling with amusement. I am absolutely petrified, Lucien admitted. What if I forget the vows? What if I stumble over the words? What if— You'll be fine, Briar said, squeezing his hands. We'll be fine. Together, remember? Together, Lucien agreed, and felt the nervousness settle into something warm and certain. The ceremony was beautiful, officiated by a vampire elder who had served Lucien's family for generations and who spoke the ancient words with gravity and warmth. Lucien and Briar exchanged vows, pledging themselves to each other for as long as they both endured, and when the elder pronounced them married, the great hall erupted in applause and celebration. The feast that followed was everything the centennial celebration had not been. Lucien sat at the head table with Briar at his side, and this time when the court raised their glasses in toast, they met his eyes. They acknowledged him. They celebrated with him, not around him, and the difference was profound. Are you all right? Briar asked him at one point, echoing her question from that first night. Lucien looked at her, his wife, this brave human woman who had seen him when he was invisible and loved him when he was lost, and felt emotion well up in his throat. I am better than all right, he said. I am happy, Briar. For the first time in 300 years, I am genuinely, completely happy. She leaned over and kissed him, sweet and brief and full of love, and the court cheered. The celebration lasted until dawn, and Lucien and Briar slipped away as the first hints of light began to touch the horizon. They retreated to Lucien's chambers, which had been transformed with flowers and candles into something romantic and intimate, and there they came together as husband and wife with a tenderness and passion that felt like sealing the promises they had made. Afterward, lying tangled together in the pre-dawn quiet, Briar traced her fingers over the place on Lucien's chest where the debt bond had burned. Does it still hurt? She asked. No. Lucien caught her hand and pressed it over his heart. There is no scar, no lingering pain, just freedom. And you, always you. I've made my decision, Briar said suddenly, propping herself up on one elbow to look at him. About becoming vampire. Lucien went very still, barely breathing. And? I want it, Briar said. I want to stay with you, Lucien. Not just for 60 years, but for as long as we can have. I want to see what the world becomes. I want to help you build the kingdom you're creating, and I want to do it at your side as your equal. So yes, turn me. Are you certain? Lucien searched her face, looking for any hint of doubt or fear. Briar, once it is done, it cannot be undone. You will never see the sun again, never taste human food, never age or change except in knowledge and power. It is a one-way door. I know, Briar said firmly. I've thought about it, I've asked questions, I've learned everything I need to know, and I'm certain. I want this, I want you, I want forever if we can have it. Lucien pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, and let himself feel the relief and joy and love that flooded through him. Then forever it is, he promised. When you are ready, we will do this. I will turn you myself, and I will be there when you wake, and we will face eternity together. Soon, Briar said. Let me have a few more weeks, tie up loose ends, say goodbye to the sun properly. But soon. Soon, Lucien agreed, and held her as the dawn broke outside and the world continued turning. The turning happened on the night of the autumn equinox, a date Briar chose for its symbolism, the balance between light and dark. Lucien prepared everything carefully, consulting with the oldest vampires in the court to ensure he did it right, because the process was dangerous and he would not risk Briar's life on uncertainty. They gathered in his chambers with only Lord Draven and Lady Seraphine present as witnesses. Briar wore a simple white dress, and her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she looked both brave and frightened in equal measure. Last chance to change your mind, Lucien said, cupping her face in his hands. No one will think less of you if you decide this is not what you want. I want this, Briar said steadily. I want you. Do it, Lucien. He kissed her first, pouring all his love and fear and hope into it. Then he moved to her throat. His fangs extended, sharp and deadly, and he bit down carefully, finding the vein and drinking deep. Briar gasped, her hands clutching at his shoulders, and Lucien tasted her life on his tongue, warm and vital and precious beyond measure. He did not drink enough to kill her. That was not how the turning worked. Instead, he drank until she was weak, her heartbeat slowing. Then he bit his own wrist and pressed it to her lips. Drink, he commanded softly. Drink, my love, and come back to me. Briar drank, her eyes fluttering closed, and Lucien felt his blood flow into her, ancient and powerful, rewriting her humanity cell by cell. When she had taken enough, he pulled his wrist away and cradled her as her body began to shut down, as her heart slowed and her breathing became shallow. This was the dangerous part. She had to die with his blood in her system, and then she had to come back. There were no guarantees. Some humans died and stayed dead, the turning incomplete or rejected by their bodies. Others came back wrong, twisted into something monstrous and mad. The success rate was perhaps 50%, and Lucien had staked everything on those odds. Briar's heartbeat stopped. Lucien held her, pressing his ear to her chest, listening to the silence where her heart had been, and felt terror like he had not known since the wars. He had killed her. He had taken this vibrant, warm, living woman and stopped her heart. And if she did not come back, he would have murdered the person he loved most in the world. Come back, he whispered against her hair. Please, Briar, come back to me. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5. Lord Draven and Lady Seraphine exchanged worried glances, and Lucien felt his control start to fracture, felt the edges of his composure crumbling. Then Briar gasped. It was a huge, tearing breath, like someone breaking the surface after nearly drowning, and her eyes snapped open. They were no longer hazel. They were red, vivid, and bright. the eyes of a newborn vampire. Her heart beat once, twice, settling into the slow, steady rhythm of the undead, and her skin began to pale, the warmth leaching out as her body completed its transformation. Lucien. Her voice was rough, uncertain. I am here. He pulled her closer, relief making him shake. I am here, my love. You did it. You came back. Briar sat up slowly, looking around the room with those new red eyes, seeing everything with vampire senses for the first time. Everything is so clear, she whispered. I can hear your heart, and Draven's and Seraphine's. I can smell the candles and the flowers, and I can smell blood. Is that normal? Completely normal, Seraphine said, moving forward with a glass of blood already prepared. Here, drink this. It will help with the hunger. Briar took the glass and drank, and Lucien watched the way her face changed, the way satisfaction and relief chased across her features. She was still Briar, still his wife, still the woman who had asked if he was all right. But she was also vampire now, pale and beautiful and eternal, and she was his in a way that transcended even marriage. How do you feel? He asked when she had finished the glass. Strange, Briar admitted. Strong, hungry, happy. She looked at him, and her smile was the same as it had always been, warm and genuine and full of love. I'm still me, Lucien, just more. You are perfect, he said, and kissed her again, tasting his own blood on her lips mixed with the vintage she had drunk. The transition took weeks. Briar had to learn to control her new strength, her new senses, the hunger that would be her constant companion for the rest of her existence. Lucien guided her through it with patience and care, teaching her to feed without killing, to move through the world without revealing what she was, to navigate the complex politics of vampire society as one of them instead of an outsider. She adapted quickly, her natural intelligence and curiosity serving her well. Within a month, she could pass for a vampire who had been turned years ago instead of weeks, and within 2 months she was attending court functions at Lucien's side as his acknowledged queen, because that was what she had become in all but the formal ceremony. The court accepted her. How could they not? She was Lucien's choice, the woman who had helped him break the debt bond and reclaim his throne. She was brave and kind and surprisingly adept at the political maneuvering that court life required, and she made their king happy in a way he had not been for centuries, which earned her loyalty from even the most skeptical vampires. 1 year after the breaking of the debt bond, Lucien held another feast. This one was not a centennial celebration, but a coronation, the formal ceremony that would make Briar his queen-in-law as well as fact. The great hall was packed even more tightly than it had been for the centennial, every vampire in the court present to witness history. Briar walked down the aisle in a gown of midnight blue, her white hair changed by the turning cascading down her back like a waterfall, and her red eyes were bright with emotion. She looked every inch a vampire queen, regal and proud and beautiful, and when she reached the dais where Lucien waited, the court rose as one in acknowledgement. Lucien took her hands, and together they faced the assembled vampires. 1 year ago, Lucien said, his voice carrying through the hall, I stood in this place and invoked the right of defiance. I broke the debt bond that had held me for 3 centuries, and I did it because of the woman standing beside me. Briar saw me when I was invisible, valued me when I was ignored, and gave me the courage to reclaim what I had lost. Today, I ask you all to witness as I crown her queen of the court of endless night, my partner in all things, my equal, and my love. He lifted the crown, a delicate circlet of black iron and rubies that matched his own, and placed it gently on her head. Briar knelt before him, the old forms observed, and Lucien spoke the words of the coronation, the ancient vows that bound queen to king and kingdom. Rise, Queen Briar, he said when the ceremony was complete. Rise and take your place. Briar stood, and the court erupted in applause and cheers that shook the rafters. She turned to face them, this woman who had been a servant girl a year ago, and she smiled with confidence and grace and the sure knowledge that she belonged here, that she had earned this crown not through birth or politics, but through love and courage and the simple act of seeing someone who needed to be seen. The feast that followed was magnificent, a celebration of everything they had built and everything they would build together. Lucien sat at the head table with Briar at his side, and this time, when the court talked and laughed and raised their glasses, they included both of them. No one was ignored. No one was invisible. "Are you happy?" Briar asked him, her hand finding his under the table. Lucien looked around the great hall, at his court celebrating their queen, at the future stretching out before them full of possibility and hope. Then he looked at Briar, his wife, his queen, his salvation, and felt love so profound it almost hurt. "I am happy," he said. "More than I ever thought possible. You gave me back my kingdom, Briar. But more than that, you gave me back myself, and I will spend the rest of eternity making sure you never regret it." "I could never regret you," Briar said, leaning in to kiss him softly. "You're my choice, Lucien, today, tomorrow, and for all the nights to come." Around them the feast continued, the court celebrating their king and queen, and outside the great hall the city glittered with electric lights, modern and ancient existing side by side. The vampire realm beneath the earth hummed with life and power, and above it all the moon rose full and bright, a silver witness to the love that had remade a kingdom. Lucien pulled Briar close, and she came easily, fitting against his side like she had been made for it. Together they watched their court, their people, and knew that whatever challenges came, whatever the future held, they would face it as they had faced everything else. Together, and in a world that could be cold and dark and cruel, that was more than enough. Years passed, turning into decades, and the court of endless night flourished under Lucien and Briar's joint rule. They reformed the old laws, established new protections for the young and vulnerable, opened relations with other vampire courts, and even began tentative dialogues with the human world about peaceful coexistence. It was slow work, requiring patience and diplomacy, and more than a few hard-fought battles, but they persisted, and gradually things changed for the better. The former elders faded into obscurity, their power broken, their influence scattered. Constantine retreated to a country estate and was rarely seen at court. Valentina left the realm entirely, seeking refuge with a distant vampire house across the ocean. Cassius alone remained in the city, running his businesses and investments, but staying well clear of palace politics. They had been neutered, and they knew it, and Lucien felt no pity for them. They had stolen 300 years of his life. He would not mourn their fall. But he did not spend his time dwelling on the past. He was too busy building the future, with Briar always at his side. She proved to be a natural leader, intuitive and compassionate but firm when necessary, and the court came to love her nearly as much as they respected her. She became known for her fairness, for the way she listened to even the lowest vampire's concerns, and for the fierce protection she offered to anyone who needed it. She reminded Lucien of himself, before the debt bond, before the years of erosion. She reminded him what it meant to be a good ruler. On the 50th anniversary of their wedding, Lucien took Briar back to the great hall where everything had begun. It was late, the court asleep, and they stood alone on the dais where he had first invoked the right of defiance. "Do you remember that night?" Lucien asked, his arm around her waist. "Every moment," Briar said, leaning into him. "I was terrified. I thought for certain the elders would find a way to stop you, that I would lose you before we even had a chance to begin. But you came anyway," Lucien said. "You walked through those doors and stood with me, even though you were afraid." "Because I loved you," Briar said simply, "and because you deserved to have someone stand with you." Lucien turned to face her, cupping her cheek in his hand. Her skin was as pale as his now, her hair as white, her eyes the same vivid red. She was vampire, through and through, and she would be at his side for centuries to come, and the thought filled him with a joy so complete it felt like coming home. "I love you, Briar Noctis," he said, "my wife, my queen, my everything." "I love you, Lucien," she replied, "my husband, my king, my choice, always." They kissed there in the empty hall, two vampires who had found each other against all odds, who had fought for their love and their freedom, and won. And when they finally pulled apart, they stood together looking out over the space where their future had been forged, and they knew that whatever came next, they would face it the same way they had faced everything. Together, in the endless night, forever.